The hill didn't exist on any map. No name, no elevation marking, no strategic symbol. Just a rise of dirt and stone in the middle of a forgotten valley, surrounded by burned trees and mud that smelled of iron and rot. And yet, men were ordered to take it. At first light, the platoon moved forward in silence. Boots sank into wet ground, rifles held tight, fingers numb from cold and fear. The air was heavy, pressing down on their lungs like it knew what was coming. The radio crackled once, then went dead. That was the first sign something was wrong. Their lieutenant stopped, raised his fist. Everyone froze, no gunfire, no movement, no enemy in sight. Too quiet. Veterans knew this silence. It wasn't peace. It was waiting. Intelligence said the enemy had pulled back overnight. A retreat, broken lines, low morale. That was the report. The ground told a different story. Shell craters were fresh. Tracks crisscrossed the mud. Heavy boots dragged equipment. Something large moved uphill during the night. Someone had been here, recently. A private whispered, "Sir, this feels wrong." The lieutenant didn't answer. Orders were orders. They advanced. Halfway up the slope, the world exploded. Machine gun fire ripped through the fog from 3 directions at once. Men dropped before they understood what was happening. Dirt and blood filled the air. Someone screamed for a medic. Someone else didn't make a sound at all. They hit the ground, returning fire blindly. The enemy was invisible, dug in, elevated, prepared. This wasn't a retreat. It was a trap. Mortars followed. The hill shook, trees shattered. Shrapnel tore through bodies and packs alike. Radios screamed static. Command was gone. Maps were useless. The lieutenant crawled to the nearest crater, blood on his sleeve, not his own. He looked uphill and finally saw it. Bunkers, camouflaged perfectly, overlapping fields of fire. The enemy had turned an unnamed hill into a fortress, and now the platoon was pinned in open ground. Minutes felt like hours. Ammo ran low. Smoke burned their eyes. Orders turned into shouted guesses. Survival replaced strategy. One by one, squads stopped responding. By noon, the hill still stood untouched. By noon, the platoon no longer existed as a unit, and the men who survived understood a brutal truth the maps never showed. Some battles aren't about territory. They're about who gets erased first. The ground became their only ally. Men pressed their faces into the mud, breathing through clenched teeth as bullets snapped inches overhead. The enemy machine guns fired in disciplined bursts, not panicked, not wasteful. Someone up there knew exactly how much ammunition they had and how long this would take. "Don't move!" someone shouted. A second later, the voice was gone. The lieutenant crawled from crater to crater, trying to count who was still alive. 12 at the start. Now he could only see 7, maybe 8. The rest were silent shapes that didn't answer when called. A medic dragged himself toward a wounded corporal. Halfway there, a round caught him in the back. He fell forward without a sound, fingers still clawing at the dirt. No one went to help. Not because they didn't care, because they couldn't. Every attempt to move drew fire. The hill owned the battlefield. From above, the enemy could see everything, every twitch, every desperate crawl, every mistake. Smoke grenades were thrown. The wind tore them apart in seconds. The radio operator slammed the handset again and again. Nothing but static. Either the antenna was gone, or command had already moved on. The lieutenant realized something then, something colder than fear. No one was coming. This wasn't an assault anymore. It was containment. The enemy wasn't trying to push them back. They were waiting for them to bleed out, to run dry, to break. A private beside him whispered, "Sir, are we supposed to die here?" The lieutenant didn't answer. He checked his magazine instead. They tried suppressive fire. It barely scratched the bunker lines. Muzzle flashes flickered like eyes in the fog, then vanished. Every enemy position was dug deep, reinforced, planned weeks in advance. This hill wasn't random. It was bait, and they had taken it. Minutes dragged on. Ammo counts dropped. Wounded men groaned quieter as shock set in. One soldier began praying out loud until another grabbed his sleeve and told him to stop. Not out of cruelty, but because the sound carried uphill. Then the mortars started again, not randomly this time, adjusted, walking closer. The first shell landed behind them, cutting off retreat. The second landed among the wounded. The third landed dead center. Earth lifted, bodies lifted with it. When the smoke cleared, the lieutenant was alone in his crater, alive, but barely. And in that moment, staring up at the untouched hill, he understood the real purpose of this place. It wasn't meant to be captured. It was meant to erase units quietly, one platoon at a time. The lieutenant waited until the shelling stopped, not because it was safe, but because silence meant the enemy was listening. His ears rang. Dirt filled his mouth. One eye barely opened. He wiped it with a shaking hand and forced himself to look around. The crater was smaller now, its edges collapsed inward, like the earth itself was trying to bury him. Movement to the left. A private. Barely 18. Helmet gone, blood running down his temple, but his eyes were still clear. "How many?" the boy whispered. The lieutenant counted again, slowly, carefully. 4. 4 men still breathing. They were scattered across the slope, pinned in shallow holes, each one isolated. No radio, no medic, no cover. And the hill above them, silent again. That silence was worse than gunfire. The lieutenant knew what it meant. The enemy was confident. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. If nothing changed, they would all die here, not in a charge, not in a last stand, but slowly, anonymously, erased by distance and patience. He made the decision no officer wants to make. "We're moving?" he said quietly. The private stared at him. "Now?" "Yes, before they expect it." There was no plan in the proper sense, just direction. Down the slope, not back the way they came, but diagonally, toward a dead angle where the terrain dipped and the bunkers couldn't see clearly. It was a gamble measured in seconds. He signaled with his hand. 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They ran. The hill exploded. Machine guns opened instantly, stitching the ground where they'd been moments before. Dirt geysered around their boots. One man fell immediately, spun sideways, dropped, didn't get back up. The lieutenant didn't look. You never look. They sprinted, slipped, crawled, rolled into a shallow ravine just as a burst cut through the air above them. Bullets snapped so close they sounded like tearing cloth. 2 men left, breathing hard, shaking, alive. For a moment, just a moment, there was hope. Then a rifle cracked from somewhere below. The private collapsed beside him, eyes wide, confusion frozen on his face. No blood at first. Then it came, dark and fast. The lieutenant grabbed him, dragged him deeper into the ravine, hands slick with blood he couldn't stop. "I don't want to die here," the boy whispered. The lieutenant didn't answer. He pressed down on the wound, knowing it wouldn't matter. The hill had adapted, new angles, new shooters. This wasn't chaos, it was control. The private went still. The lieutenant was alone again. He checked his rifle. 3 rounds left. Not enough for a fight, just enough for decisions. He listened to footsteps above, slow, careful. The enemy was advancing now, not rushing, hunting. He realized then what the breakout really was. Not an escape, a test to see who would panic, who would run, who would reveal themselves. The hill didn't need to chase. It waited, and everything eventually came to it. Night did not bring darkness. It brought clarity. The lieutenant realized this as the light faded and the battlefield changed its voice. During the day, war screamed, artillery, engines, shouting men. At night, it whispered. Every sound mattered, every breath betrayed you. He lay pressed into the ravine mud, unmoving, long after the last light disappeared. He did not shift his weight, did not wipe the blood drying on his hands. Pain was information now. Fear was discipline. Above him, boots crunched slowly, not many. They weren't searching blindly, they were closing a net. A shadow passed across the edge of the ravine, then another. No voices, no shouted commands. Whoever they were, they didn't need to talk. Professionals. The lieutenant remembered training manuals that warned about this moment when the enemy stops shooting and starts walking, when distance no longer protects you, when survival depends on stillness. A pebble rolled down the slope. He didn't flinch. A shape appeared 10 meters away, a helmet outline against the faint starlight. The man paused, listening. The lieutenant could hear his breathing, slow, controlled. They knew someone was here. They just didn't know where. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost meaning when every second felt borrowed. Then the flare went up. White light tore the night open. The ravine turned into a bowl of shadows and exposure. Every depression, every body-shaped hollow revealed itself instantly. The lieutenant squeezed his eyes shut. Too late. He was seen. Gunfire erupted. Short bursts, disciplined, surgical, not to kill, to pin. Bullets chewed into the ravine walls, showering him with dirt and stone. He rolled instinctively, firing once, twice, not aiming, just noise, just defiance. A scream cut through the night, not his. Someone else had been hiding nearby, another survivor, another ghost who thought he was alone. The scream ended abruptly. Silence returned, heavier than before. The flare burned out. Darkness again. But now they knew. Footsteps moved closer, slow, certain, no rush. The lieutenant crawled deeper, his fingers brushing against something hard. A corpse, cold already, rigid, someone who had been alive this morning. He pressed himself against the dead man, using the body as cover, using death to delay death. His rifle was empty now. He checked his sidearm. 1 magazine, 7 rounds. He laughed silently, a short, broken breath that tasted like dirt and blood. 7 chances, 7 mistakes allowed. The footsteps stopped. A voice spoke softly above him, not shouting, almost calm. "Come out." No accent he recognized, just certainty. The lieutenant didn't move. "Staying there won't help," the voice continued. "You're alone." That was the cruelest part, because it was true. The enemy wasn't trying to intimidate him. They were offering him the dignity of understanding. The hunt was over. What came next would be personal. Dawn came quietly, no artillery, no engines, just a pale gray light bleeding into the sky, exposing what the night had hidden. Bodies, burned ground, broken equipment scattered like abandoned thoughts. The lieutenant was still alive. He didn't know why. His mouth was dry. His hands shook, not from fear, but exhaustion. He hadn't slept. He hadn't moved. Every muscle burned with the dull pain of holding one position for too long. They had pulled back before sunrise, not retreating, resetting. That was worse. He crawled out of the ravine slowly, expecting a shot with every movement. Nothing came. The silence felt staged, artificial, like a room after people stopped pretending. He checked the dead around him. 3 bodies, none he recognized. Faces stiff, eyes open, staring at nothing. He took ammunition where he could. 1 magazine half full, a cracked canteen, a torn map with no useful markings, no radio, no unit, no direction. Only the knowledge that he was inside enemy-controlled ground and that someone had decided to let him live for now. That meant something. He moved uphill using shell craters and burned trees as cover. The landscape looked wrong in daylight, too still, too empty. Even birds avoided this place. Then he saw it. Tracks. Fresh. Deliberate. Leading away from him. They weren't chasing anymore. They were guiding. The realization made his stomach tighten. This wasn't pursuit. It was pressure, herding him toward something, somewhere. He considered turning back. Impossible. Every direction behind him was exposed, every ridge a potential firing line. If they wanted him dead, he would already be. That meant they wanted him moving. The question was why. He followed the tracks for nearly an hour, moving slower than instinct demanded, faster than safety allowed. Every sound felt amplified. His breathing, his boots brushing grass, the faint click of gear. Then the ground dipped sharply. Below him lay a shallow valley, and in the center of it, a road. An intact road. Vehicles burned along its edges. Craters punched through the asphalt. A column that had tried to move at the wrong time, at the wrong moment. This was where they wanted him. As he studied the road, a distant engine sound rolled through the air, low, steady, armored, heavy, reinforcements, not his. He finally understood. He wasn't a survivor. He was bait. They hadn't hunted him to kill him. They had hunted him to place him. And when the shooting started again, it wouldn't be for him. It would be for anyone who came looking. He reached the road just as the engine noise faded. Whatever had been moving out there had stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. The road was worse up close, asphalt torn open by impacts, metal fragments embedded like shrapnel teeth. Burned-out trucks leaned at unnatural angles, their frames warped, cargo spilled and abandoned, helmets lay in the dust, rifles with melted slings, a boot with no leg inside it. This wasn't an ambush site. This was an execution zone. He crossed the road fast, every instinct screaming that standing here too long meant death. On the far side, the ground rose gently toward a tree line that looked untouched. Too untouched. He froze. Something was wrong with the forest. No movement, no wind in the branches, no insects. Even the leaves seemed fixed, like a painted backdrop. He lowered himself into a shallow crater and waited. Minutes passed. Then he heard it. Not a shot, not a shout. A click, soft, metallic, behind him. He didn't turn. He knew better. Another click. A deliberate one this time. Close enough that he could feel it more than hear it. A voice followed, calm, almost bored. "Don't move." The accent was unfamiliar, not local, not friendly. He raised his hand slowly. A boot pressed into his back, forcing him face down into the dirt. His rifle was pulled away. His remaining magazine followed. They didn't bind him. They didn't strike him. That terrified him more than violence would have. Hands searched him quickly and professionally. Whoever this was, they weren't regular infantry. No shouting, no adrenaline, just procedure. He was rolled onto his back. 3 figures stood over him, camouflage mismatched, faces smeared with dirt, no insignia, weapons configured for close and long range both. One of them carried optics he'd never seen up close before, scratched, worn, but precise. Hunters, not soldiers. The man who had spoken crouched beside him. "You moved exactly where we needed," he said. "Good discipline." The lieutenant tried to speak. His throat failed him. The man smiled faintly, not kindly. "Relax. Now, if we wanted you dead, you wouldn't have seen the road." That confirmed it. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a tool. The man gestured toward the valley behind them. "Your people are advancing. Armor, engineers, command staff." The lieutenant's heart sank. "They'll use this road," the man continued. "They always do." He leaned closer. "You're going to walk back the way you came. Slow, visible, injured if you like. You'll be convincing." The words settled like ice. "If they follow you," the man said softly, "we kill them." "And if I don't?" the lieutenant asked. The man stood. "Then we kill you first, and still kill them." They stepped back, returned his rifle, unloaded, and pointed toward the slope. "Start walking." As he climbed, every step felt borrowed. He understood now. This battle wasn't about ground. It was about control. And he was already dead. The only question left was how many would die with him. He started walking uphill, slowly, unevenly, exactly as instructed. Every instinct told him to run, to scream, to drop to the ground and force a decision. But instinct had no value anymore. Survival now depended on obedience and timing. He made himself limp, dragged his left leg through the dirt, let his shoulders sag, lowered his head like a man barely holding himself together. From a distance he would look broken, exhausted, lucky, perfect. He could feel them watching, not behind him, around him. The forest on both sides felt occupied, even though he saw nothing. No silhouettes, no movement, just the unbearable certainty of optics tracking every step. After 15 minutes, he heard voices. His people, shouting, urgent, relieved. A rifle snapped up in his direction, then another. "Hold fire!" Boots pounded toward him. Hands grabbed his shoulders, steadying him before he could collapse on his own. "Jesus, where the hell have you been?" He didn't answer immediately. He let his knees buckle. Let them think the silence was shock, not calculation. They pulled him back behind cover. Familiar faces, dirt-streaked, tired, alive. A medic knelt beside him, checking for wounds. "You're bleeding," he said. The lieutenant nodded. That much was true. An officer crouched in front of him. "Captain, operations." "Report," the captain said. "Now." This was the moment. He had to lie, but not too much. Push them forward, but not too fast. If he warned them outright, he'd be shot before the words finished leaving his mouth. If he said nothing, they'd advance blind. He chose fragments of truth. "They're dug in near the road," he said hoarsely. "Ambush ready, heavy weapons. They let me through." The captain frowned. "Let you?" "They wanted us to move," the lieutenant continued. "They know our patterns." That was enough to plant doubt. But doubt wasn't command. Behind them, engines rumbled. Armor staging, engineers preparing to clear the road, men checking weapons, adjusting straps, all the familiar rituals before movement. The lieutenant watched it happen with a growing sense of unreality. This was the column. This was the kill. The captain stood. "We push in 10. You stay back." The lieutenant grabbed his sleeve. "Sir," he said quietly, "if you move down that road, they won't hit the front. They'll hit the middle. Command vehicles first." The captain stared at him. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the captain pulled his arm free. "You're shaking. Get checked." He walked away. The lieutenant sat there, surrounded by men who trusted him, and had no idea he was already condemning them by existing. From the tree line far away, unseen eyes adjusted their scopes. The trap was set, and he was standing right in the center of it. The column began to move at 11:40. Engines growled low, restrained, as if even the machine sensed what waited ahead. Tracks bit into the dirt. Infantry fanned out along the tree line, spacing themselves by habit, not by safety. The lieutenant watched from behind a wrecked transport, helmet in his hands. He knew the timing now. They always waited until the center of the formation committed, until turning back became harder than going forward. The road swallowed the first vehicles. Nothing happened. 10 seconds. 20. Relief flickered across a few faces. Someone laughed. Short, nervous. The captain raised a hand, signaling the engineers forward. That was when the world split. The first explosion didn't come from the front. It came from underneath the third vehicle. The blast lifted the armored carrier off the road, flipped it onto its side, and slammed it back down like a broken toy. The sound hit a half-second later, a crushing wave that punched the air from lungs and sent men to their knees. Before the echo died, the second charge went off. Then the third. Perfect spacing, perfect timing. The road vanished in fire and smoke. Shouts erupted, orders overlapped, radios screamed with half-formed messages and cut-off screams. The lieutenant stood frozen. This was exactly where they said it would happen. Then the shooting began. Not wild, not panicked, measured, single shots, controlled bursts, high ground. Men fell without warning, head, neck, center mass. Officers dropped first, medics second, anyone who tried to organize movement. The forest came alive with invisible death. A sergeant beside the lieutenant collapsed mid-sentence, a small dark hole appearing just below his eye. He hit the ground before the sound of the shot reached them. Time fractured. The lieutenant moved without knowing why, dragging a wounded man into cover, pressing down on a bleeding leg, shouting orders no one could hear. He wasn't supposed to be here. They had told him to stay back. But part of him needed to see it, to witness the cost of his survival. A shell slammed into the road's edge, showering them with dirt and metal. The smell of burning fuel filled the air. Through the smoke, he saw the captain, still standing, still trying to rally the men. The lieutenant opened his mouth to scream. The shot came first. The captain folded forward, hands grasping at nothing, a red bloom spreading across his chest. The lieutenant felt something break inside him. This wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. Every move anticipated, every response punished. The enemy didn't need numbers. They had position, patience, control. The shooting slowed, not because the fight was over, but because there were fewer targets left worth shooting. From the tree line, a final shot rang out, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Then silence. The smoke drifted, fires crackled, survivors lay pressed into the dirt, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The lieutenant understood now. He had been allowed to live, so this could happen. And the worst part wasn't that he survived. It was that he knew it wasn't finished. Silence arrived unnaturally fast. No retreating footsteps, no victory shouts, no final burst of gunfire, just the crackle of burning fuel and the distant creak of cooling metal. The lieutenant lay face down in the dirt, cheek pressed against the earth, afraid that even breathing too loudly might invite another shot. Around him, bodies remained motionless, some dead, some pretending to be. He didn't know which was safer. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time had stopped meaning anything. A man somewhere nearby whimpered once, a low, broken sound, and then cut himself off, as if realizing the mistake halfway through. No one came to help him. No one dared. The ambush hadn't ended. It had simply paused. That was the terrifying part. The lieutenant slowly lifted his head an inch, just enough to see the road. What had been a column was now wreckage. A transport burned on its side, flames licking through open hatches. Another vehicle sat nose down in a crater, tracks torn off like ripped limbs. The road itself looked wounded, split, blackened, unrecognizable. The captain lay where he had fallen. No one moved him. No one would. The lieutenant felt a bitter, hollow realization settle in his chest. They hadn't wiped them out because they didn't need to. They had broken them. A radio crackled suddenly. Every muscle in his body locked. "Command, this is—" Static swallowed the rest. No reply came. The enemy knew what radios sounded like. Another long stretch of silence followed. Then, movement. Not charging, not attacking. Observers. The lieutenant sensed them more than he saw them. Shadows shifting high in the trees. A glint of light that vanished too quickly to be certain. The feeling of eyes. Patient. Evaluating. They were counting. Who could still fight? Who might still run? Who was worth killing later? The lieutenant's hand shook. He thought about standing up, about waving his arms, about surrendering to anything that would end this waiting. But instinct screamed louder than reason. Move, and you die. So he stayed still. As dusk crept in, the enemy presence faded, not retreating, just dissolving into the forest. The pressure eased, but the fear didn't. They were gone, but they weren't finished. Only after darkness fully settled did the survivors begin to crawl toward one another, silent, terrified, ashamed to be alive. The lieutenant finally sat up. His uniform was soaked with someone else's blood. He realized then what the ambush had truly accomplished. It hadn't just destroyed the column. It had planted something inside the survivors. A certainty that at any moment, tomorrow, next week, years later, someone unseen could decide it was time to finish the job. And they would never see it coming. They moved before dawn. Not as a unit, not as a formation. Just men drifting out of the darkness, one by one, afraid to make sound, afraid to look back. No orders were given, no plan was spoken aloud. Everyone understood without words. Stay together long enough to leave this place, then disappear. The lieutenant walked with a limp he hadn't noticed before. Every step sent pain up his leg, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was still alive. Pain meant he hadn't been chosen. They left the road behind. No one trusted it anymore. The forest swallowed them almost immediately. Branches clawed at their uniforms. Mud sucked at their boots. Somewhere in the distance, an engine burned itself out with a hollow metallic whine, then went quiet forever. The lieutenant stopped once and looked back. Smoke still hung over the ambush site, thin and gray, rising straight into the early morning air. No movement, no pursuit. That scared him more than gunfire ever had. They marched for hours without speaking. Every snapped twig made them flinch. Every bird that took flight felt like a signal flare. The men no longer walked upright. They hunched, heads low, eyes scanning the tree line, expecting the forest itself to open fire. At noon, they reached a shallow ravine and collapsed. No one complained. No one joked. No one even asked who was missing. They already knew. The lieutenant counted faces anyway. Too many gaps. Too many names that would never be spoken again. One of the younger soldiers started shaking uncontrollably. Another wrapped an arm around him, not to comfort him, but to keep his teeth from chattering too loudly. That was when the lieutenant understood the final cruelty of what had happened. They had survived, but survival wasn't the same as escape. From that day on, every shadow would feel deliberate, every silence would feel watched, every open road would feel like a trap. Years later, the lieutenant would wake up at night, convinced he was still lying face down in the dirt, waiting for a shot that never came. He would avoid windows. He would sit with his back to walls. He would scan crowds the way he once scanned tree lines. And sometimes, in quiet moments, he would feel something worse than fear, gratitude, because someone, somewhere, had decided he wasn't worth the bullet. The ambush would never be written as a decisive victory. No monuments would mark the road. No official report would capture what it felt like to be spared on purpose. But for the men who walked away, the war never truly ended. It simply followed them home